Modern culture sells you a convenient lie. They call it a glow up. They wrap the concept of growth in neon lights and inspirational quotes. But the biological reality is far more violent. True psychological evolution is not an addition. It is a clinical amputation. You are not simply gaining a new version of yourself. You are cutting away the connective tissue that once kept you safe. The human brain does not celebrate your personal progress. It flags your evolution as a catastrophic breach of social security. To grow is to intentionally become a biological alien. You are choosing to stand outside the warmth of the tribe. Look at a 32-year-old sitting in a familiar dive bar. 3 childhood friends are surrounding the table. One friend starts a familiar script. It is a workplace grievance they have repeated for 3 years. The individual hears the same cadence. They recognize the same logical fallacies, but they do not interject. They do not offer the obvious solution. Instead, the individual focuses on the micro-tremors in their own right hand. They are consciously forcing their fingers to remain still against the cold glass. Their facial muscles are locked into a static mask. This mask mimics engagement while the brain executes a flight response. The pupils dilate by 2 millimeters. The body is preparing for a physical threat that isn't in the room. They are sitting with home, but their nervous system detects a predator. Success is triggering the same neurochemical alarms as a physical assault. Your DNA is actively prioritizing the comfort of the group over your survival. The actual fatal mechanism isn't the distance between you and them. It is the biological betrayal happening inside your own skull. Relationships are maintained by a hardware mechanism called neural coupling. It is the invisible frequency that keeps a social group in sync. When you sit with friends, your brain normally mirrors the activity of theirs. This is limbic resonance, the biological definition of belonging. But when you upgrade your cognitive patterns, you break the frequency. Your hardware is now running an operating system they haven't installed. Your mirror neurons are failing to find a reflection in the room. The emotional data you used to share is no longer compatible. This is neural desynchronization. It is the silent death of a connection before a single word is even spoken. The brain is an energy-saving machine that relies on social predictability. Your peers expect you to react to the old jokes and the old traumas. They have mapped out exactly how you will respond to their complaints. When you grow, you stop providing those predictable data points. You create what neuroscientists call a reward prediction error in their brains. Their systems were prepared for a specific dopamine hit from your shared laughter. When that hit never arrives, their amygdala flags you as a threat. They don't see your progress as a personal achievement. They perceive you as an unstable element in their safe environment. To their nervous system, your evolution looks like a malfunction. Watch close how this physical misalignment manifests in a single moment. Person A tells a self-deprecating joke about being broke or stuck. This is their standard social currency, their way of asking for validation. In the past, you would have laughed within the required 200 millisecond window, but now, you have developed a different relationship with your own potential. The joke isn't funny anymore. It is a symptom of a cycle you've escaped. You missed the window. The resulting 1.5 seconds of silence is a clinical measurement of your distance. Person A subconsciously crosses their arms in a defensive posture. Their breathing shallows as their brain processes a social rejection. You lower your gaze to your drink to hide the lack of resonance. The alignment gap has just become a physical wall between 2 chairs. This creates the edit self syndrome. To preserve the peace, you begin downsampling your own intelligence. You intentionally suppress your enthusiasm to keep them from feeling small. You censor your new insights to avoid triggering their alarm systems. This is not being nice. This is a massive, sudden increase in your cognitive load. Your prefrontal cortex is working overtime to perform a version of you that no longer exists. The energy required to maintain this lie is biologically unsustainable. It manifests as a specific type of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. It turns into migraines that only appear after you've been socializing. You are literally poisoning your own nervous system to remain relatable. But the exhaustion isn't the hardest part. The hardest part is the crushing weight of a guilt that shouldn't exist. This guilt is not a moral compass. It is a vestigial survival mechanism. It is a relic of a world where standing out meant getting left behind. In the Pleistocene era, different was a synonym for dead. Your brain does not care about your self-actualization. It only cares about your inclusion in the social safety net. Your DNA is still running on the logic of the savannah. It views your personal evolution as a dangerous departure from the pack. The anterior cingulate cortex is the brain's primary alarm system. This is the exact region that processes the agony of a physical wound. It is also the region responsible for the pain of social rejection. For most of human history, being cast out was a death sentence. Your brain treats a social rift with the same urgency as a broken limb. It uses the sensation of pain to stop you from straying too far. The guilt of growth is actually a biological leash. It is designed to snap you back into the middle of the stagnant crowd. When you perceive yourself leaving the tribe, your hypothalamus reacts. It floods your system with a surge of cortisol. This is not conscience or empathy speaking to you. It is a chemical emergency intended to force your compliance. The brain is using fear to sabotage your independence. It is trying to keep you small enough to stay safe. It rewards your stagnation because stagnation is predictable. It punishes your ambition because ambition is a variable it cannot control. Watch how this biological terror dictates a single text message. An individual receives a significant promotion or a creative breakthrough. They open the group chat to share the milestone with childhood friends. They pause for exactly 30 seconds. Their heart rate increases to 95 beats per minute. A slight sweat breaks out on their palms. They are not experiencing a social threat response. They eventually type a message that heavily buffers the success. They write, "I just got lucky," or "It's really not that big of a deal." This is a micro-submission ritual. They are reflexively lowering their status to avoid triggering the group's envy. They are begging for permission to be successful without being exiled. The result is a state of altruistic suffocation. You stay in the burning house of a toxic relationship to avoid the cold. You remain in a stagnant circle, not out of loyalty, but out of terror. Your nervous system is terrified of the open field of independence. You are sacrificing your potential to appease a prehistoric survival instinct. You are literally suffocating your future to keep your past comfortable. This biological terror creates a separation that is felt long before it is spoken. You are still physically in the room, but you have already become a ghost. Growth is not just the acquisition of new skills. It is the acquisition of superior pattern recognition. Once you identify the emotional loops of your peers, you lose the ability to ignore them. You are no longer reacting to the words they are saying. You are reacting to the underlying machinery of why they are saying them. This creates an irreversible psychological barrier between you and your past. The illusion of a shared reality is permanently shattered. You see the gears turning in their repetitive complaints. You see the exit signs they refuse to walk through. The ignorance that once bonded you has been deleted from your hardware. You have essentially blinded yourself to the version of reality they still inhabit. Most psychological evolution involves a shift in your locus of control. You move from a state of learned helplessness to internal ownership. When you observe friends still operating as victims of their circumstances, the chemistry changes. The empathy you once shared transforms into a clinical exasperation gap. Your brain has increased its categorical complexity. You now distinguish between temporary comfort and long-term safety. You separate venting from problem solving. Your peers are still using an old binary map of the world. They interpret your new nuances as a form of arrogance. To them, your refusal to join the pity party is a personal judgment. Your silence is perceived as a declaration of superiority. Watch how this plays out in a standard social setting. A peer performs a standard passive, aggressive maneuver. They make a biting comment about your recent habits, disguised as a joke. In the past, you would have laughed or reflexively defended yourself. Now, you simply observe the specific vocal tonality. You note the precise moment they avoid direct eye contact. You recognize the insecurity driving the social aggression. Instead of reinforcing the drama, you remain silent. You keep your spine neutral and your expression blank. This lack of drama reinforcement is felt by the peer as a cold vacuum. They feel exposed by your refusal to play the familiar game. The peer immediately switches the subject to a shallow, safer topic. This leads to the heaviest burden of evolution, invisible grief. You begin mourning people who are still standing right in front of you. You are grieving the version of them that you can no longer connect with. You are grieving the shared future that your new awareness has just cancelled. If you continue to grow and they remain static, there is no shared destination. The gap is not a misunderstanding that can be solved with a conversation. It is a structural change in how you process the data of life. You are saying goodbye to the intimacy of shared ignorance. You are realizing that the price of your clarity is their eventual absence. But if you refuse to acknowledge this gap, you commit the ultimate sin. You begin the betrayal of the only person you are actually responsible for. Attempting to shrink back into your old skin is a fatal error. It does not save the connection. It merely replaces the acute pain of guilt with the chronic toxicity of resentment. Resentment is a far more destructive chemical state for the human nervous system. It is the slow-acting poison of a mind that has decided to betray itself. Human psychological health relies on three pillars: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When you sacrifice your autonomy and competence just to maintain a false relatedness, the architecture of your mind begins to collapse. You are effectively lying to your own biology. This sustained lie forces the brain into a state of chronic stress response. Your system is constantly braced for the moment your true self is revealed. Every time you suppress a sophisticated thought to remain relatable, you trigger a micro spike of cortisol. You are literally acidifying your own blood to keep the group comfortable. This repeated suppression causes a measurable degradation of the prefrontal cortex. Your executive control center is being rewired to prioritize camouflage over objective reality. You are not just being polite or keeping the peace. You are physically weakening your brain's ability to make high-stakes decisions in the future. The neural pathways for authentic expression are beginning to atrophy from disuse. You are training your nervous system to view your own excellence as a threat to be managed. Observe the physical aftermath of this self-betrayal. The social gathering ends and the individual returns to the silence of their own home. They do not feel the warmth of connection. Instead, they experience a total collapse response. They lie on the floor or stare at a blank wall for 20 minutes without moving. This is the physiological debt of the performance. The brain is attempting to recover from the massive energy cost of pretending to be smaller than it is. The individual is paralyzed by the weight of the self. They just had to murder for 4 hours. Later that evening, the redirected resentment finally breaks through the surface. They snap at a partner or react with disproportionate rage to a minor inconvenience. The spilled coffee is not the source of the anger. The anger is the body's only way to vent the pressure of a day spent in self-erasure. The fatal consequence is that the relationship dies anyway. But by staying too long in a shape that no longer fits, you ensure it ends in active contempt. You stay until you despise them for a prison you volunteered to stay in. You end up destroying the very history you were so desperate to protect. You turn a once meaningful bond into a radioactive site of unspoken bitterness. The distance you feel is not a mistake to be fixed. It is the only thing standing between you and psychological suicide. Outgrowing your world is not a moral choice. It is the biological tax of a high-functioning mind. Feeling guilt is simply a diagnostic signal. It proves your empathy hardware is still operational, but acting on that guilt is an act of psychological suicide. You are essentially drinking poison and expecting your potential to survive. The distance is the precise measurement of your health. You do not owe anyone your stagnation. Your past self is a dead skin, not a contract. You are not required to remain a relic to make others feel secure. Here is the brutal physical reality of your survival. First, you must terminate the explaining loop. Stop trying to justify your evolution to people who benefit from your old self. In biological terms, explaining is a submission signal. You are exposing your belly to the tribe, asking for permission to be different. Every explanation is an invitation for them to fix. You back into your previous shape. Shut the loop. Your results do not require a defense. Second, implement strategic proximity. Stop valuing relationships based on the amount of time you've known someone. Historical duration is a sunk cost, not a biological value. Shift to value-based connections. You must reduce the frequency of contact before the resentment threshold is crossed. It is better to be a distant, respected memory than a present, bitter ghost. Third, you must tolerate the void. There is a period of floating between your old tribe and your new alignment. It is a cold, silent space. This is where the most critical neural rewiring occurs. Do not panic and fill this space with the ghosts of your past. Loneliness is the sterilization of the environment before the new growth begins. Evolution is a lonely process, but the alternative is far worse. The alternative is a crowded grave of your own potential. You would be buried with people you no longer know. You would be holding a version of yourself you've come to hate. If you feel the polite pain of outgrowing your world, look at it clearly. It is the signal that you are still alive. You are exactly where the math says you should be. Stop apologizing for surviving your own evolution. We are going deeper next time. Subscribe if you are ready to stop looking back.